Well, it's been a great 2 years, but unfortunately, all great things must come to an end. So I must sadly announce that my old intro is going to retire. For the sake of this new intro. The Sony PlayStation, a landmark console in the history of gaming, a leading hand in the transition to 3D, and the results of what was supposed to be a CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. Although most of my childhood gaming experiences were spent on Nintendo consoles, the PlayStation's a platform I hold near and dear to my heart. It was the first ever gaming console I ever owned, my sisters and I getting it as a Christmas gift when I was only 3 years old, and man, I've got a lot of fond memories of this thing. However, as I learned when I eventually found my way to the internet, I never actually ended up playing much of what was considered the essentials of the PS1. Like, I owned the Crash Bandicoot games, one of the Spyro games, and over time I got my hands on some Final Fantasy games, but to this day I've still never played games like Gran Turismo, or Tomb Raider, or Metal Gear Solid. So what PS1 games did I grow up with, you ask? Well, that's what this video's about. Looking back, I grew up with a lot of really obscure titles on the console. The kind of games you'd see in a bargain bin or in a secondhand game store for probably no more than $10. And it's been a while since I've played really any of these games, so I thought it'd be fun to go down memory lane and take a look at a bunch of them. I don't know, I just wanted to talk about weird games from my childhood in a YouTube video. So we're gonna start off with probably the least obscure game of the bunch, Bust-A-Move 4. I'm sure many people are at least familiar with what Bust-A-Move is, but to those who aren't, it's a match 3 puzzle spin-off series of the classic arcade game Bubble Bobble. And to those who don't know what Bubble Bobble is, please don't tell me in the comments because then I'm gonna feel really old. The series is known as Puzzle Bobble in Japan and Europe, but in North America it got renamed Bust-A-Move. Your guess is as good as mine as to why they renamed it. Now with that said, I suppose Bust-A-Move technically isn't all that obscure, but from personal experience, whenever I see people talking about Bust-A-Move, it's either about the first 2 games or the series' recurring usage of terrible box arts. I don't think I've ever heard a single person talk about Bust-A-Move 4 without me instigating the conversation about it, so I am counting it for this video. Besides, I want an excuse to talk about how really good this game is. Now at the core of it all, Bust-A-Move 4 does follow the same formula as the previous games. Shoot colored bubbles upwards and have 3 or more of the same color connected to pop them, all the while the screen lowers more after every few shots. And that alone is already really fun and addicting to play, especially when you can get a well-aimed shot in and wipe out any bubbles attached to the bottom of what you're popping. But Bust-A-Move 4 adds 2 new mechanics to make the gameplay that much more fun. For the standard puzzle mode, it's new pulley-based levels with a focus on clearing the bubbles on both ends of the rope, while also keeping the 2 sides perfectly balanced, as things should be, which makes for an interesting twist on the regular game. And for the versus mode, a new chain reaction system was added, where dropped bubbles can connect to clusters of its color if it'll cause the cluster to pop. And this can happen multiple times in a row, leading to some incredible combos that'll devastate your opponent with added bubbles. Trust me, it's really satisfying to pull off. Bust-A-Move 4 also carries with itself a surprising amount of game modes. There's the standard puzzle mode and versus modes, of course, but there's also a skill-based challenge mode, a level maker, an endless player versus computer battle mode, which is where you can encounter and unlock new characters, and not 1, but 2 story modes, one for puzzle mode and one for player versus computer mode. The player versus computer story is pretty standard. The evil Madame Luna destroys the all-powerful rainbow bubble, and now you have to compete with others to restore it, ending with a confrontation with Madame Luna, who turns out to be a robot piloted by series villain Dreg. As one does. But it's the puzzle story mode where things get bizarre. Your character of choice is awoken by a time goddess named Cronoa, who explains that she lost her set of tarot cards and that the universe will fall apart if they're not reunited. So instead of fixing her mistake and finding the cards herself, she sends you to reclaim them, so you must travel through a dream world containing physical representations of each tarot card and play through the various puzzle levels to restore the cards. It's kind of a silly concept in hindsight, but hey, it's fun nevertheless. Not much else to really say about this game, honestly. It's a really fun match 3 puzzle game with some cool new mechanics and quite a bit of content to keep you coming back. It's definitely my go-to Bust-A-Move game, that's for sure. And with Bust-A-Move 1 and 2 getting Switch ports, I can only hope that Bust-A-Move 4 joins that bandwagon eventually. Then again, those were the Neo Geo versions of 1 and 2 that made it to Switch, which 4 never got released on, so I'm thinking that may be unlikely. That's a shame. Though while we're on the topic of puzzle games, let's talk about another one, Crossroad Crisis. Now, unlike Bust-A-Move, this one definitely fits the mold of obscure. I could barely find anything about this game when I tried to research it. Didn't stop it from getting a re-release as a PS1 classic on the PlayStation Store though, apparently. Maybe this game isn't as obscure as I thought it was, never mind. Out of all the games in this video, this one's the one I played the least of growing up. This was a game that my mom played a lot more of, alongside Bust-A-Move 2. Playing it for this video was the first time I'd played it in probably over a decade, and while it took me a bit to figure out how exactly it worked, once I got the grasp of the mechanics, it was actually pretty fun. It's basically a Pipe Mania game, where you have to move around and rotate colored tiles to guide the baby chick and make sure it doesn't fall into the water. The catch here is that, to get access to the goal inner tube, you have to destroy a certain number of tiles. You destroy tiles by having the baby chick walk across multiple of the same color in a row, and once it steps onto a different colored tile, all those previous tiles get destroyed. I know that may sound a bit confusing, and trust me, it was initially, but after a bit, I got the hang of it and had quite a bit of fun getting as many tiles destroyed as I could. However, I will say, the later levels did get my anxiety going pretty badly, as you're given much less room to move around tiles, and the baby chick gets faster, and it becomes hectic trying to keep yourself on top of everything. Now, unlike Bust-A-Move 4, Crossroad Crisis is really light on game modes, so after about 20 to 30 minutes of play, you've kinda got the full experience unless you get a friend to play multiplayer with you. Still, for what it is, it's a neat little puzzle game. Actually, if for some reason the original team ever thought of re-releasing the game, it could probably work pretty well as a mobile game. It's definitely got that quick pick up and play a few levels kind of design going for it. Who knows, it made it onto the PlayStation Store, so maybe it's not an impossibility. Though I think that's enough puzzle games for now. Let's move on to a genre that I've talked a lot about in my previous video, racing games! I played a ton of racing games growing up. It was my go-to genre alongside platformers. Though because of that, I ended up getting and playing a lot of racing games, including ones I never would have heard of if I wasn't such a huge fan of the genre. For example, what on earth is a Cubics? Okay, in all seriousness, I had never heard of Cubics until I got this game, and to this day, I've yet to watch a single episode of the show. Yep, you heard that right, we're entering licensed game territory now. For quick context, Cubics was a CG kids show that ran in the early 2000s. It originated from South Korea, but was brought over to North America and dubbed by everyone's favorite butcherer of East Asian cartoons, 4Kids Entertainment. Now granted, Cubics was actually made for kids, so I imagine it didn't go through any crazy censorship like 4Kids' other shows did, but still, that name is almost never a good sign. But anyway, as I said, I've never seen a single episode of the show, nor had I heard of it as a kid. So I'm absolutely not the target audience for a Cubics game, and yet here I am having grown up with one in my collection. Cubics Robots for Everyone, Racing Robots. I didn't play this one a ton, after all, Crash Team Racing was my go-to PS1 racing game, but as someone completely unfamiliar with the source material, I still came back to this game more than expected. And after replaying the game for this video, I genuinely can't understand why that was the case. So I won't pick apart the game's story too much, as a fair amount of plot points would probably make more sense for watchers of the show, but to give a quick rundown, this kid named Connor randomly decides that he and his friends should partake in races using their robots, and in between their races they find out that robots are exploding because of some substance called Solex, and there's also this evil guy who wants Solex. Again, it probably makes more sense with context, but yeah, if you haven't seen the show, this game ain't gonna fill you in on anything. Also, I can't confirm this to be fact, but between all the cutscenes being narrated over by just one character, and with how some of the scenes are edited, I'm gonna take a wild guess and say they scrambled together footage from the show and got a voice actor in the booth to record an original story for the game. Feel free to fact check me on this one if you want. But enough about the story, let's talk gameplay. And, there's not really a lot to say, really. What you see is what you get. It's a top-down racing game where 4 players race to complete 3 laps first. The only controls in this game are using the D-pad to accelerate and steer, and the X button to use power-ups littered around the track. That's it. It's as simple as you can get. There are really no deep mechanics of any sorts in this game. And this isn't helped at all by the overly simple track design. There are 9 tracks in this game, each set in one of 3 areas, and there is absolutely nothing interesting about these tracks, and nothing to make tracks of the same theme stand out from one another. The layouts are shaped differently, yeah, but there's no uniquely shaped mini-map to convey that, and every single track is flat with nothing engaging to speak for itself. Adding on to that, and I get this is a game based on a kid's show, but this game's really easy, even on the hardest difficulty. So with all that in mind, it won't take long to beat the main game. Took me less than half an hour to finish the story, to be more specific, and unless you've got friends who want to play this game with you, which my friends never wanted to, and I'm now understanding why, the other modes will be of little use to you. There is an image gallery though, might as well check that out. Excuse me? You lose your story mode upgrades by returning to the mode menu? Despite there being a save button in the story mode menu? Well, that makes no sense. Ah well, it's easy to get that stuff back. Though I might actually switch the game to easy to make that process easier. Excuse me? You lose all your progress for returning to the main menu? Okay, no, that can't be right. Let me try to reload my file. And I'm back in the story mode menu with all my stuff back. What? You know what? I think that's a good sign to move on. So what's up next? Uh-oh. This is Dragon Tales, a cartoon for younger kids that aired from 1999 to 2005 on a little network known as PBS Kids, aka what you'd end up watching if you didn't have cable. It was about two kids named Emmy and Max and the adventures they had in a fantasy world filled with, well, dragons. Now, unlike Cubics, this is a show I can actually somewhat talk about because I watched a lot of PBS shows as a little kid, Dragon Tales included. Granted, I can't say I remember a ton about Dragon Tales, but I do remember liking it when I was young. So it makes sense that we'd end up with a Dragon Tales game in our PS1 collection. But that said, oh boy. Dragon Tales Dragon Seek, a hide-and-seek platformer, I guess? I use the term platformer loosely here, but we'll get into why shortly. So we start off by choosing which of the kids to play as, and how many of the characters we want to find within the level. Okay, that's kind of an interesting design choice. It's like a more engaging way for kids to decide what difficulty they want to play on. And as soon as I say that, it's immediately followed up by a skill level select. Really gotta get a hold of this speaking too soon habit. I had no idea what difference there was in the skill levels, so I went for level 3, because I'm no high level hide and seek player, so level 4 was too extreme for me. In all seriousness, while scripting this video, I decided to go and see if the game's instruction manual specified any difference between the skill levels. Sure enough, the manual does actually break down the skill level differences. Essentially, the higher the skill level, the more control the player would have over their character, while the lower skill levels do a lot more hand-holding. Probably should have gone with level 4 after all, now knowing this, but guess there's no going back. So how gameplay works is as follows. You explore pretty notably sized areas, and pressing one of the face buttons nearby certain parts of the environment will have your character search it. You either find a hiding character, a dragonberry, or me whenever I wasn't winning a game as a kid.
I still can't find any dragons. This isn't fun.
I will shamefully admit that I was a bit of a poor sport growing up. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole game, wandering around and pressing X aimlessly until you find everyone. I said to use the term platformer loosely earlier because, at least on level 3, you can only jump when the game prompts you to. You might have more control over your jumps on level 4, but I never ended up checking, mostly because I got bored of this game real fast. I get I'm not the target audience for this, and for a real young Dragon Tales fan, this might be a fine enough way to entertain them, but playing this as a young adult, it does not take long for this game to get monotonous. After finding all the characters, you get to go through a storybook detailing your epic hide-and-seek adventure. And apparently you can also use up an entire PS1 save data slot to keep it. And given how much room the average PS1 memory card had, let's just say it was often these storybooks that get deleted first when I needed room. Also, I have no idea what the requirements for this are, but after doing 3 hide-and-seek levels in a row, I got randomly brought into a race between Emmy and Max, riding their respective dragons Cassie and Ord. And the only input I could make was giving Ord dragonberries to go faster. I ended up winning, and my prize was a song from the show. Huh. And that's pretty much it. There's only 4 levels, so it doesn't take long to see everything this game has to offer. Again, it's incredibly apparent that this game was targeted to a much younger audience, which makes sense given the source material. I just hope this wasn't sold at full price back in the day.
Now we're done, that was so much fun.
This isn't fun.
For the next game, we're gonna head back into the racing game genre with something a bit more different. A kart racer with a heavy Looney Tunes-esque cartoon inspiration. This is MotorToon Grand Prix, or MotorToon Grand Prix 2 in Japan and Europe. The original game was released literally weeks after the PS1 launched in Japan, but it never got localized. So when its sequel 2 years later got localized, the 2 was dropped in the North American version. No idea why the European version kept the 2 though. So as I said, MotorToon Grand Prix is a kart racer with a heavy inspiration from classic cartoons, between the cars having faces and power-ups including stuff like bombs and giant weights. The cars even stretch, for lack of a better term, when turning, kind of giving that vibe that the cars themselves are alive. The game's certainly oozing with charm, I'll definitely give it that. As for the gameplay, it's pretty standard kart racing fare, with the exception of one mechanic change. Much like the original Super Mario Kart, you pick up items by driving over these coin icons on the road. But unlike Super Mario Kart, or really any other kart racer now that I think about it, instead of immediately getting an item, driving over the icons adds a coin to your inventory. When you use a coin, the classic item rotation system occurs, but you get a proper view of everything you're currently rotating through. This is a pretty creative diversion of the standard kart racer item box system, and I'm surprised I haven't seen any other kart racers try this since. There's still an element of randomness with what item you get, yes, but there's also a bit more strategy with choosing when to use a coin. I dig it, it's pretty neat. And it's a good thing they included this, because beyond that and the cartoony aesthetic, MotorToon Grand Prix is a pretty standard kart racer, and also very short. There's only one Grand Prix in the game, consisting of only 5 tracks. Once those 5 races are over, you get your congratulations and you're off to the credits. That said, based on the unlockables, this is a game that heavily encourages multiple playthroughs. You unlock something different depending on which difficulty you beat the Grand Prix on. On easy, you unlock 3 secret characters. On normal, you unlock 5 new tracks that are reversed reskins of the already existing tracks. And I don't mean mirrored, I mean legit reversed, which is admittedly kind of creative. And the higher 3 difficulties, you unlock different minigames. I didn't play the game on every difficulty, so I don't know every difference between them, but I can confirm a few. On normal difficulty, the AI drivers start using power-ups, something you'll absolutely know because the announcer won't shut up about it. Fireball! 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 And on the hardest difficulty, none of the coin icons are active, meaning you have to rely entirely on skill, which can be admittedly easier said than done, given the turning controls are a bit on the stiff side. And this is one of those racing games where you drift by turning and braking at the same time, so some turns are needlessly difficult. Heck, there's one character in the game who straight up can't drift, so yeah, don't play as him. Now, unfortunately, despite the game being pretty fun initially, the charm does kind of run out rather quickly, not helped by the small lineup of tracks. And while yes, the game does have multiplayer, which usually expands the replayability of a racing game by a ton, MotorToon Grand Prix's method of doing multiplayer is rather inconvenient, to put it simply. To play 2-player, you need, I'm not joking, 2 TVs, 2 PlayStations, and 2 separate copies of the game. And you need to hook up the 2 PlayStations in order to do 2-player. Now, on one hand, that does mean when playing multiplayer, you're not having to worry about split screen. But on the other hand, what? I don't know, this just sounds way too convoluted, especially when you could have just had them plug in a second controller and deal with a bit less screen space. So yeah, MotorToon Grand Prix definitely got some interesting ideas, and when played in short bursts, it's quite fun, even with the somewhat stiff controls. But it's definitely lacking in content, and having such an obtuse way of playing multiplayer certainly doesn't help its case. If anything, it does make for a pretty good proof of concept for what could become a great game if fleshed out a bit more. Actually, now I'm curious if the devs of the game went on to do any more racing games. Let's take a look. Well, I guess that answers that question. Now for the next game, we're going back into the world of licensed games, this time with a movie tie-in. The PS1 era was an interesting time for movie tie-ins, because while we were still getting a fair amount of crap, we were also getting quite a lot of good tie-in games, most notably the ones based on Pixar's work. On the flip side though, their then new rival animation company DreamWorks wasn't doing so hot with their movie games. Case in point, Shrek Treasure Hunt, a game based on DreamWorks' smash hit Shrek, released exclusively on the PS1 in late 2002, well after the following console generation had started. Like, yes, I get it. Companies don't immediately jump ship from an older console once the next gen started, but more often than not, they'll port their game to the newer console as well, not leave it as an exclusive to the older one. Then again, Persona 4 released as a PS2 exclusive 2 years after the PS3 launched, and that game did pretty well. So I suppose it is possible to be successful in the older hardware. And that is probably the last time you will ever hear someone compare Shrek to Persona 4. But anyway, what's the story of this game?
Shrek is planning a special picnic for Princess Fiona, but all the picnic items have gone missing. The items must be in the swamp somewhere. Use the swamp map to help Shrek locate and collect them all before Princess Fiona arrives.
Uh-huh. Also, sorry to correct you, narrator lady, but you read it wrong.
Shrek
Trademark
is planning a special picnic for Princess Fiona.
Trademark.
Use the swamp map to help Shrek
Trademark.
locate and collect them all before Princess Fiona
Trademark.
arrives.
Okay, I'll stop kidding around and give this game a proper chance. Who knows, maybe the game itself will be fine. Wow, this looks awful. To give a quick reminder, this game came out in 2002, the same year as Mario Sunshine and The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. Now granted, those games are on stronger hardware, so you know what? I'll give a PS1 example. Spyro Year of the Dragon came out 2 years before this game and looked notably better than it. Heck, Crash Bandicoot Warped came out 4 years before this and looked better than it. And that game was only made in 10 months! Also, wait, no, you can't be serious. This is an explorative 3D platformer in 2002, and it doesn't have analog control. Granted, I'm not sure how much using a control stick would fix this really stiff feeling movement, but it'd probably feel even just a little bit better than being constrained to a D-pad. Controlling Shrek in this game is one of the most awkward things I've ever had to do in a game. It constantly feels like the game itself is trying to hold me back when I try to walk, let alone when I try to jump. Oftentimes, the game won't even recognize that I was holding a direction when I jumped, and Shrek will kind of just pop in place. This is fine. So as I said, this game's a 3D platformer, a collectathon to be more specific. Every area has a specific collectible you need to find all of in order to unlock that area's minigame. Complete the minigame and you get one of the picnic items. Get all the picnic items, you get the end credits. I'll go into the minigames in a moment, but first, how about that sound design, eh? Like, to give the game credit, the soundtrack isn't all that bad. Generic and forgettable, yes, but not bad. But oftentimes, you're not even gonna hear the music because this game has absolutely no sense of sound balancing. It'll just constantly have loud, obnoxious sounds overlapping with one another, and it won't take long for it to get on your nerves. But anyway, enough rambling, time to get to those minigames. Literally all of them suck. To give you an example, the first one's essentially a really long game of Simon Says, and they only get worse from there. 2 platforming challenges that suffer from the janky movement controls, the bridge one especially, numerous catch-all-the-things challenges, one of which having the most uncooperative reticle I think I've ever seen in a game, a shooting gallery with auto-lock-on, completely destroying all form of difficulty, a rhythm-based tug-of-war minigame? It's more shove-of-war, if anything. A ridiculously slow and boring fishing minigame, and to top it all off, an explorative platforming challenge where you have to find all the armor pieces before going deaf from the complete lack of sound balancing. Nope, it's okay. It's overrated anyway. And after you get all the picnic items, the game kind of just ends. You watch a short FMV, the credits roll, and you're sent back to the company logos and title screen. I really shouldn't be surprised, but after spending an hour and a half permanently damaging my ears, I was kind of hoping for something more. Oh yeah, the game takes less than an hour and a half to beat, and unlike Crossroad Crisis or Motortoon Grand Prix, there's literally nothing else in the game to expand that playtime. No exaggeration, this might be the worst game I've ever played. Or at the very least, it's up there as one of the worst games I've ever played. Outside of the not terrible music, there is absolutely nothing worthwhile about this game, and actually playing it is both a pain to control and to listen to. Frankly, the fact that we still own this game after all these years is really surprising. Okay, actually, I take back what I said before. There is another redeeming factor in this game, that being the FMV that plays when you lose a minigame. Now, before I move on to the next game, I'm actually going to give a bit of a warning going into this one, particularly to anyone who's arachnophobic. If you have a problem with spiders, I'd recommend skipping to the time on screen, because you're probably not going to like this next game. I'll give you a chance to do so now. We all good? Alright, so, I can't think of a proper way to introduce this game myself, so I'll just let the cover speak for itself. And this is why I gave that warning. This is Spider the Video Game. I know, real original title. A 2D platformer that launched in early 1997. It was developed by Boss Games Studios, a sister company to Boss Film Studios, a visual effects company best known for their work on movies like Die Hard and Ghostbusters. Not sure why a visual effects company decided to make video games, but hey, thanks to their decision, we now know how terrifying a spider with a combat knife and a machine gun would look. I didn't play this game a ton as a kid. This was something my older sisters tended to play more, so most of my memories of this game came from remembering how creepy it was. This is a game that radiates "how was this rated E" energy, and this is made apparent literally seconds after booting up the game, as Boss Game Studios' logo animation consists of a decapitation. Ah yes, guillotines. Fun for the whole family. The game's story takes place in the very near future, if this establishment date's anything to go by, and focuses on a scientist experimenting with cybernetics that can be controlled with the mind, testing this technology on a robotic spider he created. However, a rival corporation wants his work, so they break into the lab and literally gun him down in an E-rated game. However, during the whole getting shot process, the scientist manages to transfer his consciousness into the robot spider, allowing him to fully control it. Now using the robot spider body, it's up to him to follow these agents, get his old body back, and stop whatever this evil corporation's up to. You know, just another day on the job and all. So as I mentioned before, this game's a 2D platformer, built on a fully 3D plane. As this robot spider, you've got all the abilities you expect a spider to have. Crawling around, jumping, being able to climb walls and ceilings, using silkstring to lower yourself, missiles, a flamethrower. Wait, I don't think real spiders are able to do those last two. And if they can, I can understand why arachnophobia is so common. The spider-like movement is actually where a lot of the core design comes from. Being able to crawl on walls and ceilings adds a whole new plane to consider for a platformer, and the developers definitely took advantage advantage of that, with maze-like levels that encourage scaling every surface for goodies. One type of goodie the game has to offer up is leg upgrades, which give you new weapons. You can have up to 4 equipped at a time, 2 front leg weapons and 2 back leg weapons, and you can toggle between your equipped weapons at any time. These weapons include the aforementioned missiles and flamethrower, and trust me when I say that blowing up other robot insects with these weapons is really satisfying. Another thing that this game excels at is atmosphere. The opening cinematic sets a very dark, moody feeling, and everything in this game following certainly helps keep with that tone, from the title screen to the in-game environments to the soundtrack, which can I just take a moment to quickly note how much of a surprise listening to it for the first time in years was? Prior to my replaying for this video, the only tune I really remembered from this game was one of its later, more ominous pieces, which definitely captures that atmosphere I mentioned earlier. But listening to the soundtrack, there's a lot more metal than I remember. And for being crunched down to fit a PS1 sound font, the sound holds up incredibly well. I wish I could show you more of this game beyond the first few levels, but as I quickly learned from playing it again, it's a lot harder than I recall. The jump's a bit heavier than I was expecting, and if you don't have any long-range weapons, you'll have to resort to your slash attack to destroy enemies. And trust me, killing enemies at short range in this game is easier said than done. It's also not helped that, at least in the earlier levels, there's no checkpoints, so if you die at any point, you're going back to the beginning. You also lose all of your upgrades whenever you die, so that certainly doesn't help. Though for what it's worth, I was surprised at how much fun I had with this game. I can't say I was expecting it to hold up as well as it did. I'm definitely gonna have to come back and do a full playthrough of this one in the near future. This was a lot of fun. Also, if you need more proof that this game shouldn't have been rated E, here's the cutscene you get if you quit after getting a game over.
Just cut it off.
It's time to move on to something a little more lighthearted. So now we move on to the last game of this video, and to end things off, we're going to be looking at, of all things, a sports game. Here we have XS Junior League Dodgeball, an installment in the PS1 series of kids sports games, well, XS Junior League. Looking at screenshots of the other titles in this franchise, you kinda get a pretty low effort vibe, and based on the cover for their dodgeball game, it's easy to assume that this is going to be something very similar. You assumed wrong. That's an anime. This is something that to this day really confuses me. The game's cover art is exactly the same style as every other XS Junior League game, yet the game itself has a very anime-esque art style and is sprite-based instead of ugly 3D model-based. How did this happen? Well, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to tell you because there is practically no information on this game online. Out of all the games I've talked about in this video, this is easily the most obscure of the bunch. The only info I could really find on this game was that it was released in Japan years before as a game with no connection to XS Junior League. Either way, somehow XS Games got the right to localize the game and slapped it into their XS Junior League series, despite looking absolutely nothing like the other titles, but either way, here we are now with an anime dodgeball game. What a note to end on. Much like other games we've talked about before, XS Junior League Dodgeball doesn't really offer much when it comes to modes. Once you've selected your mode, you choose your team captain, and bam, you're playing dodgeball. There are 8 team captains to choose from, each with their own special power. I end up playing as 2 of the captains for my recording. Jim, because he has the best power in the game, and April, for old time's sake. What do I mean by that? Well, younger me may or may not have had a little bit of a crush on her. Actually, now that I think about it, she was probably what started my liking for cute girls with glasses. Who knew an anime dodgeball game on the PlayStation could affect one's life so drastically? But I digress, let's get to talking about the gameplay. So at its basis, there's not really much to say. It's dodgeball. You throw the ball, hit members of the opposing team with it until they get knocked out, and the last team standing wins. Okay, there's a bit more to the game than that. For example, there's these pickups that float on by every once in a while. These can restore your health, increase your special meter, or even revive KO'd teammates. They are a bit hard to pick up though, because there is a slight delay to the player's jump. You have to time your press to just before the pickup goes over your character's head if you want to actually get the pickup. Actually, on that note, the controls in general are a bit weird, honestly. They're mostly fine, but there's 3 actions that are surprisingly difficult to pull off. The previously mentioned jumping for pickups, catching the ball, and doing a special attack. And much like with jumping, catching the ball requires you to press the button just before it reaches you. And while I did get the hang of the timing, initially it was brutal trying to get the timing down. You are able to, well, dodge shots of course, but catching is more beneficial as it's how you'll fill up your special meter. As I said earlier, each team captain has their own special power, and to use it you have to fill up your meter by catching shots or through pickups, and then as the team captain, run towards the center line and do a jump throw. The timing on when you throw is incredibly picky, and there were several times where I'd go to do a special attack and it wouldn't go through. That said, when you get the timing right, you get treated to a crazy special attack that'll do a considerable amount of damage to the entire opposing team. Unless you're Jim, whose special attack fully heals the remaining members of his team. Jim confirmed for best healer. But yeah, that's Excess Junior League Dodgeball. Sorry if this seems like an anticlimactic way to end off this marathon, but there's really not much to say about it. It's a difficult and short, but pretty fun dodgeball game. Not something I'd say you should go out of your way to find, but if you do find a copy of it for cheap, it's worth giving a try. So yeah, that was fun. It's been quite the treat going back to these weird games I grew up with. Some were as good as I remember, some I question why we still own them, and some I was pleasantly surprised by. But yeah, thanks a ton for watching this dumb video about my bizarre collection of PS1 games. Feel free to give your own thoughts on any of these games in the comments. I'm curious to see how many of you are familiar with any of them, or maybe even all of them. But anyway, that's all I got for this video. This has been Black Mage Maverick, and until the next video, have a nice day everybody.